This lecture will explore life in the USSR during the 1920s and 1930s and examine how the Soviet Union's war preparations transformed people's daily lives. Labor duties, confiscations, repressions, movement restrictions, and control over private life became integral to the continuous state of emergency that defined Soviet society for 2 decades. After giving up the vision of the world revolution in 1925, the Bolsheviks pivoted towards industrialization. This strategy prioritized building factories for weapons production and preparing for an aggressive war. Agricultural exports became the sole financial source for heavy industrial development. To secure this goal, the regime launched an unprecedented assault on the peasantry, seizing grain and forcing people to work for the Bolshevik state. In Ukraine, this campaign is known as the Holodomor of 1932 to 1933. Peasants were compelled to join collective farms, working for the state without compensation. When resistance and local uprisings emerged, authorities responded with emergency state controls. Economically successful farmers, branded as kulaks, faced repression, arrests, exile, and execution. For those remaining, unattainable grain quotas were established. Predictably, peasants failed to meet these quotas, resulting in total grain confiscation as punishment. The USSR applied identical policies across all grain-producing regions, causing mass peasant death. Kazakhstan suffered the most, with approximately 40% of its population perishing. In Ukraine, the state took not only grain, but all edible supplies. Blocking units were stationed along the Ukrainian-Russian border to prevent peasants from escaping famine-stricken territories. Eyewitness accounts reveal the harrowing reality. 8-year-old Anastasia witnessed a widow being stripped of her last bundle of beans. Daily, she watched corpses being carried across the schoolyard to the cemetery. They were carried in sheets, without coffins, unmourned, she recalled. During the collectivization process, Anastasia's entire maternal family was decimated. Grandparents were exiled from the village, and 4 uncles were repressed. What was happening in the world at that time? The United States was mired in the Great Depression, while Hitler had risen to power in Germany. Consequently, events in Ukraine garnered no significant international attention. News of the Holodomor barely spread beyond Soviet borders. Instead, prominent Western intellectuals like Herbert Wells and Bernard Shaw portrayed Stalin as humanity's savior. During the Holodomor, the Soviet Union exported 3.5 million tons of grain westward, while over 4 million Ukrainians died of hunger. Other nationalities, including Jews and German colonists, also suffered. The Holodomor became Ukraine's greatest national tragedy and one of the 20th century's catastrophes. Ukrainian historian Yaroslav Hrytsak notes that the Holodomor definitively broke the peasant movement and violently halted the process of Ukrainian national revival. Violence against peasants occurred alongside growing political repression. The accusation of being an enemy of the people emerged as a label for real and imagined regime opponents. Enemies of the people faced arrest, execution, imprisonment in camps, and exile to remote Soviet territories such as Siberia, Kazakhstan, and the Far East. Under Stalin's leadership, the Communist Party sought to construct a society devoid of opposition, where anyone could be branded an enemy of the people. Persecution of Ukrainian Revolution participants took place since Soviet power was established in 1918. But 1929 marked a turning point, with repressions becoming massive and public. Ukrainian intellectuals, writers, artists, directors, and teachers were the first victims. Of 260 Ukrainian writers, approximately 230 perished under Stalin's terror. The next targets were Communist Party leaders in Ukraine, Red Army personnel, and law enforcement officers. Ihor Malitsky, a Kharkiv resident, watched his father's arrest in 1938 at age 13. Branded the son of an enemy of the people, he was expelled from the pioneer organization and nearly committed suicide. Unlike many others, his family remained in Kharkiv. This was rare because Soviet authorities typically repressed entire families of the arrested, wife, children, and sometimes even parents, siblings, and close relatives such as in-laws. Political arrests peaked from 1937 to 1938, years infamously known as the Great Terror. Over 265,000 Ukrainian residents were repressed, with most either executed or imprisoned. Large-scale repressions of the 1930s were publicly performative, using show trials and media propaganda to shape societal perceptions of enemies and the consequences of perceived disloyalty. Yet most population control and coercion measures remained invisible and non-public. What were these measures? In 1932, at the height of the famine, the Soviet Union introduced passports, documents certifying identity. This had far-reaching consequences for population control. City dwellers received documents while peasants remained unregistered. They could not leave collective farms or exit their villages. Even urban passport issuance depended on workplace and social origin. Over time, the state began confiscating passports from workers in strategic sectors such as railway workers and miners, so that they could not change workplaces. Until the end of the Soviet Union, the passport system allowed the state to control population movement, binding people to their workplaces and residences. Every citizen of the Soviet Union was compelled and often coerced to work for the state. Workers were essentially attached to their enterprises like peasants to collective farms. Labor discipline breaches, tardiness, absence, or job change without administrative consent could result in months of imprisonment. By 1941, such sentences extended to 8 years. These harsh penalties existed because people were forcibly recruited to work on major construction projects, mines, and factories. In the 1920s, the Bolsheviks began creating so-called labor armies, and by the 1930s, workforce mobilization had become the norm. Alongside labor mobilization, Soviet authorities scaled up military mobilization. On September 1st, 1939, the day the Second World War began, the new military service law lowered the conscription age from 21 to 18, enabling the Red Army to nearly triple its size by June 1941. Between the two wars, Ukraine's residents endured a perpetual state of emergency, experiencing hunger and a shortage of essential products, living under constant threat of repression, forced mobilization, and eviction. For rural populations, these were years of catastrophe and destruction of traditional life. The Bolshevik regime systematically dismantled existing value systems, suppressing collective solidarity. Informant networks proliferated. People spied on each other and denounced acquaintances, neighbors, and relatives. They were often motivated by personal gain, such as seizing property or housing. This cultivated an atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Some Ukrainians perceived the future war as a potential liberation from Soviet control. Regardless, people used to the continuous state of emergency had acquired survival skills that would prove crucial in the coming conflict.